Okay, well, here we are, folks. How you all doing out there? Hope it's going well. We're back for another Let's Go Fresco episode. And today we're going to be looking at selections. We're going to be looking at how to do some masking and how to do some transformations. Okay, so these are some really useful things to be able to do. Many of you who use Photoshop know all about these things. If you have not used Fresco, I'm happy to tell you that the functionality is pretty much the same. Let me adjust my camera here, which I'm sure is getting a little wonky while I move my microphone around. There we go. All right. Yeah, so these are things that you have to do almost on a daily basis if you're a digital artist. It's important to know how to do them. Let's say hi to a few folks who are joining us over here on Adobe Live on the Behance channel. I see Cody is here. What's up, Cody Bear? Nice to see you. And Cryo, who I believe is joining us from Ireland. Correct me if I'm wrong. Afroha, hello, hello. And Sean, nice to see you as well. Colby, how are you doing? Folks, if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter, I'm following the chat over on Behance or at the Adobe Live Behance. That's be.net/Adobe Live. Okay. So let's get started. I want to jump right into this. It is Halloween after all, so I think I'm going to be doing some drawing for you. Pardon me, there we go. Going to be doing some drawing for you today that's going to be a Halloween theme. So I think we'll do some monsters and fun things like that. All right, so we're going to begin with selections. So first I got to get a little drawing on the canvas here. So I'm going to start with a brush in the inking category. These are my pixel brushes. If you're not familiar with how Fresco arranges brushes, you have three categories. You have pixel brushes, which are basically Photoshop brushes, okay, with a few exceptions. And then you have the live brushes, which are the watercolors and oils that stay wet. And then you have vector brushes, which are resolution independent, infinitely scalable brushes. Delightful. All right, moving on. So let's see. I'm going to use the Belgian Comics inker for now. And we're going to start with a little drawing of a bat, okay? So I'm just going to do this. There we go. And there's our little bat. Little cartoony kind of a bat right there, right? Very nice. All right, and he's happy to see everybody. Get his little bat feet down there. Okay. Now, with our bat, we want to be able to select it, move it around, do stuff like that. To just move it, all you have to do is tap on the Move tool, okay? And this is also your transform options, but this means I can simply move it around. You'll notice it's in a bounding box, okay? We call that a bounding box. And what it has on the corners here, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on the sides, all right, these are called handles. Why are they called handles? Because you can grab onto them and you can move them and you can transform, like so, okay, your object, all right, or whatever you've selected on a layer. You can also grab this little handle that's popping up this way, and look what I can do with that. I can rotate it. Okay, now you notice I'm rotating it freely. And if I wanted to get it to like exactly 90 degrees, that's kind of hard. It's not snapping into place, which is something you might expect to happen. Don't worry. The reason for this is I have turned snapping off. So yes, this is something that you can choose to customize. You can edit it so that it works. Hey Steve, Bernadette, nice to see you. Thanks for joining us, folks. Gary, how you doing? Heba, nice to see you as well. Annika, hi Annika. All these nice folks are joining in. Good to see you. Evie, salut. All right, so moving on. When I talk about snapping, how do you adjust that? Well, let's just exit out of here for a moment. I'm going to cancel in the top left corner, and we're going to tap on our precision panel. Precision panel is right over here, all right? You see it looks like a little box that's been gridded up, all right? We just do this, and look over here, we have snapping, all right? So we'll turn rotation snapping on, and look, I even have some options there, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees. What do you want to do? All right, so I guess I'll keep it at 30 for now. And then for alignment guides, you can even turn those on. So you can snap things to the center of the canvas, okay? Or things like that. So now that I've turned on the rotation snapping, let's tap on our little move and transform tool again, right here, little arrow, okay? Now as I rotate, watch, whoops, it snaps to 90, and you notice how there's a little blue 0 degrees that just pops up there in the middle of the bat and tells me you snapped, okay? And as I move to 30, another snap, and to 60, another snap, and to 90, another, etc. All right, so we'll move our bat back to where he was. Now this is the basics, okay? You can resize by dragging from a corner, okay, or by dragging from the sides, like this. If you drag from the corner, I want you to note that what's happening is the bat is being resized with its proportions intact. So the relationship between the horizontal and vertical proportions, okay, the height and the width, that ratio is going to remain constant as I drag along, okay? Now, if you don't want that to happen, we have some options for you, all right? But before I show you those, I also want to point out another little handy dandy thing you can do with our friend, the touch modifier. Now, as you know, if you've been using Fresco for a while, the touch modifier does lots of different things for different tools in Fresco. For example, if I exit out of here for just a moment, and I'll grab a different brush for this because I always think it's a good one to demonstrate with, the ink roller. All right, if I paint with the ink roller, but I also want to erase with the ink roller, all I have to do is hold down the touch modifier and it instantly becomes an eraser with exactly the same properties as the brush. The texture, okay, the relationship to how much pressure I use with the stylus, the size, all these things get retained, only instead of an additive action, now it's a subtractive action. So that's one of the things you can do with the touch modifier. But another thing that you can do, and I'll just undo this, double tap, bye-bye, is now that I go back to my move and transform, with this touch modifier held down, if I start to transform, you'll notice what it does is scale from the center, okay, rather than drag up and to the left. Now, if I let go and do the same thing, see how it sizes it up and to the left? All right, so that's the difference there. So if you have an object that you want to resize, and you want its position to remain fixed on the canvas, and you just want to scale it up from the center, hold down the touch modifier, and you can do so. All right, just like that. Very nice. Okay, now I was mentioning that as I scale, everything is retaining that ratio of height to width, but there are times when you don't want that to happen. This is where you can get into using things like distort, okay, which allows you to transform freely. So with distort, look what I can do. See that? I can do things like this. I can pull off to the side, pull up this way, right? Do a little bit of a transformation there. I can do this. Basically what it means is I can pull from any handle without locking any of the other handles to it. So this is very powerful, okay? See that? This is truly a free transform kind of functionality. All right, now again, holding down the touch modifier, all right, is going to lock part of that transformation right there. See that? So my top left anchor point is now locked. If I let go, oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't do anything. I was getting confused with Photoshop and Fresco. You'll have to forgive me right there. All right, so there's our free transform, really fun. All right, now there are times when you don't want to have a pure free transformation like this. Instead, you want to have certain things lock. So let's go back to our move and transform for a moment, and we'll look first at skew. Now with skew, I want you to imagine that you're taking something that's upright and you are shifting it left or right while keeping either the top, left, right, or bottom area of the image fixed. So for example, if I were to touch the handle at the top, right, this one right here, okay, and drag it to the left or to the right, when I'm in skew mode, the bottom of the image, okay, everything here, here, and here, this bottom row, so to speak, is going to remain fixed in place. Watch, I'm going to start dragging. See what I mean? So it is skewing the artwork. All right, now the same would go from the left side. Always just think about the opposite side of what you're transforming remaining fixed. So for the top, if you're transforming the top, the bottom remains fixed. Reverse for the bottom. Left, it's the right side. Right, it's the left side. So left, here we go. See what happens to the right side? The right side remains fixed and doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so that's skew. Now we're going to skip over distort. We already looked at that one. That's more of a free transform mode. Perspective. For perspective, what's going to happen is you're going to be pinching or expanding one side of the bounding box. So for example, the left side, if I grab any corner, okay, right here, this corner handle, and move it upwards, the top left corner handle will move downwards. They will move together, okay, either towards one another like this, or away from one another like that. Now, the reason we call this perspective transform is because, let's take a look at this. Imagine that I draw a box, okay? We'll go back to our Belgian comics here. I'll use my recent brushes, very handy. So imagine I have a box like this, and I want to transform that in perspective. Well, first thing I'll do is I'll make a selection of it, okay? And this is moving into our selections. Remember, your selection tool is located directly beneath your move tool right there. And when I tap on move, I've taken just part of my layer, the part that was selected, and now I'm going to be transforming it. Now here, I'm going to tap on perspective, okay? Now here we go. If I do this, it looks like the top part of the box is moving away from me. That surface is moving away from me, all right? And then I can do this to expand the bottom. All right, so first I dragged from the top left corner here, okay, to distort this way. Then I dragged from the bottom left and pulled outwards to distort that way, okay? An easier way to see this and understand the perspective that's happening is to draw an actual grid on it, okay? So what I'll do is I'll take what I've selected here, and in my layers, I'll tap on the layer, and look at this option right here, duplicate selection, okay? I went really fast, I'll show you that one more time. Right here, duplicate selection. I want to make sure you know where that is. It's in the second grouping of options you have in your layer actions. So I duplicate that selection, and now if you look over here, it's sitting on its own layer, okay? When you duplicate a selection, it automatically pulls up a bounding box, okay, because it doesn't know if you want to start transforming it right away, move it around on the canvas, etc. So because I already have my bounding box, I'll come to perspective, and you'll see now that I'm doing what I did before, which is expanding and changing it, etc., etc. Okay, so done. I'm going to come back to that other layer and hide it for just a moment. And on this layer, I'm going to draw 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're just going to divide that into a grid. And now when I go to transform it with perspective, you can see how that's useful for conveying the idea that we have something like a top plane, a top surface of an object moving away from us in space or moving towards us in space, etc. So that is why we call it perspective transform. And there it is again, okay? And then from here, you know, I can do things like this. I can pinch like that. So basically, with these options, you have every combination of transform options you should need to be able to take your artwork and manipulate it in such a way that it fits correctly in an environment and works for you. The example I like to use most often is this guy right here, this little crab. So I've got a little crab shack here, okay? Let's say we're down at the coast and we want to go have some crab legs. But the problem is that with this crab, what I want is for it to sit over here on the sign. But as you can see, this building is drawn in perspective. So I'll show you the fastest way to get this right where it needs to go on the sign. Very simple. What I do is I go to distort. Okay, you might think, why don't you use the perspective? But I'll show you. I go to distort, and all I do is I take each of the corners and just line it up with the corners of the rectangle that are drawn in perspective, and that's going to give me a perfect alignment like that. See how fast that goes? Just grab every corner, line it up inside the rectangle that you want it to sit on. You can do this with any object to get it in perfect perspective in your drawing. So I did that with distort. I used the free transform there. I dragged each corner, each handle, okay, to match up with 1, 2, and 3, and 4 corners, and now the crab is sitting exactly where you would want it to be. Very nice. Yes, Cody, I agree. Distort is my favorite transform option. I use it all the time as well. It's so great. Oh, Bruce, thanks. Glad you like this. Well, you know, with the perspective grids, it only takes a few minutes to draw something like this. It does feel a bit like cheating. All right, let's see here. Robert, nice of you to join us. Jan, nice to see you as well. Or is it Jan? I want to make sure I pronounce it correctly. Hey, Elizabeth, nice to see you too. Thanks for joining us, folks. Hope you're learning a little something here. All right, so we'll jump out of here and we'll go back to this other document here. Okay, so now I'll erase away what we don't need right here. And there's our little bat friend. Okay, so I've got this bat. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it into a reference layer. Remember this? Tap on the layer, go to Set as Reference, and just underneath it, I'll create a layer, and we'll use our paint bucket tool to give it a nice little spot of color. Okay, there we go. And I'll tap to fill, and then increase the color margin so that everything fills in very, very nicely. And do that once more right there, and right there, and right there, and right there. All right, now I can release that reference layer. And I'll go ahead and take this layer and I'm going to merge it down right here so that it's combined with the color layer. And now we have our bat. All right. Now, again, like I said, you can rotate them, you can put them however you want on the canvas and get them just to the right place. Here we go. So that's moving, okay, being able to move things, and basic transformations, which include, of course, scaling it with the ratio remaining intact, although you can, of course, pull in either direction without using any of these fancy other modes, all right? You can rotate, right? And I showed you up at the top of the show that you can also choose whether or not you want to have some kind of snapping happening when you rotate. Now, if you're doing more technical drawing, there are a lot of times, of course, when you're going to want to be able to rotate something a perfect 90 degrees, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and that's really where the snapping is essential. All right, another thing we have not talked about is this. Now, if I have an object on a layer that I've selected, or I have an entire layer, and I want to do some transformations, one of the simplest and fastest things that people frequently need to do is to be able to flip something horizontally or vertically, okay? So once again, I'm going to just tap on the Move and Transform tool. Now I want you to look up here in the top right corner, and you're going to see we have two options right here, right? Now I think these are some of the best designed icons I've ever seen because they just say exactly what they do. Right here, flip vertical. See that? I tap on it one time, it flips the whole object like it's mirrored, right, along the horizontal axis, which means it's a vertical flip. Not to be confusing there. Let's flip it back. And then to the right of that, we have flip horizontal. So here you go. Now you're flipping along that vertical axis, and look what you get. So this is great because, flip it back, what I can do is I can take this layer and I can duplicate it, okay? And we can then move it over here. We could resize it, we can rotate it, and we can flip it horizontally. And then maybe we go like this. We go to Distort, and we do a few little adjustments to the shape, like this, okay? So it's not identical to the other one. All right, now I've just changed the shape a little bit, and that's a nice thing to be able to do because now I'll make it a little smaller too. Now I have two bats, and I can take those and group them. I can take this layer and just drag it downwards on top of the other, and you'll see that creates a little group, which is indicated by what looks like a normal layer with a few blue lines underneath it. There's a group. When I now select transform and move, I can move both of those layers together as a group. All right, and now I've got duplicates. And if you're in a hurry and you have things you need to draw quickly, you know, with something that has this much detail in it, probably your people looking at the illustration are too clever and say, well, that kind of looks like a duplicate. But because the shape is a little different, the silhouette's a little different, it's not too shabby and it should do the trick. You could do a few minor modifications if you wanted to and change it up. For example, I can double tap to get into this group. And on this little guy, you know, we could just give him a little top hat. A bat with a top hat. All right? So now you have a different bat. Whatever. I'm winging it, folks. What do you think? What do you think? But yeah, if you have something a little less, you know, specific, okay, for example, like this, speaking of bats, if I draw just a basic kind of bat shape like this, and then I take that bat shape and I'll do a little refining here. I take that bat shape and I duplicate that. So we're going to go here, oops, tap on this. We're going to duplicate that layer. We'll duplicate it once more. All right, so I've got now 3 of these little bats. If I take one and I transform it like this, make it a little stubby bat like that, and then maybe go to distort, and we'll change the shape this way. Okay, say done. All right, so now I've got that little guy. And then for this other bat, we'll transform him, make him a little skinnier, like that. Rotate him in this direction. And we'll do a skew for this bat, like this. And now, if we take all 3 of these bats and put them next to one another, like this, you've had one bat, but you've gone ahead and created 2 other versions, variations of this bat, right? Now imagine being able to scatter this all over the place. You've got a bunch of bats flying around. This is an easy way to do that. But because we're in Fresco, I want to point out another clever little thing you can do with these bats. So I'll hide these first 2 here. And we'll take this bat right here and watch this. I'm going to take my brush and hold down the touch modifier right here. All right. Hold it down. And then with another finger, I'm going to tap on the screen like this. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, hold down the touch modifier, and now tap on the screen like that. And I want you to look over here where my color picker is, and you'll see that bat shape is now there. So if I open a simple brush, like my basic hard round variable brush, okay, and I'll increase the size of that brush. And you'll see in my brush preview, I see a bat shape right there, okay? Very cool. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is open my brush settings panel. And all I'm going to do is increase the spacing right here and see what's happening in the preview. Okay, see that? And now I'm painting bats, okay? Now what's really neat, I'll undo that for a second, is that if you know what you're doing with the brush settings panel, you can do a few fun things to change this up. And you can go into shape dynamics. This is where the fun stuff happens. Now apply a size jitter. So the size of the bats is going to vary by about 50%, okay? And then you want to apply an angle jitter so that the angle of the brush, the bats will change back and forth, okay? Flip the X jitter, there we go. So you're flipping along that x-axis, and now it's going to be flip-flopping so that the shape isn't identical every time from the left to the right. You're just taking it and you're basically doing a horizontal flip like we talked about a moment ago. And there you go. So now let's try this. Let's go back to spacing, increase that spacing just a bit more. Okay. And let's paint some bats. There we go. That's pretty fun. So you can create a little bat brush here in Fresco in just a matter of seconds, really. And you can play around with that. So that's a little tangent for you, but I think it's always worth showing off that feature because it's so cool and you can do so much with it. I'm going to take my brush and reset it down here at the bottom. See this? Reset. Everything's back to normal. Come to my color picker and just go back to regular black. But do note here that that multicolor swatch, which is what we call those, is saved in my recent colors. It's right there. There's that bat shape if I need to come back to it. All right, it is there now. If I close the document and reopen it, don't worry, the bat will also still be there. And good news, I've been talking to the engineers and we're looking at doubling the number of multicolor swatches that are remembered in a single document, or possibly even quadrupling it. I think currently the maximum is something like 6 or thereabouts, and so we're looking at least 12. I'm striving to get 24 because as the processing power of these iPads gets more and more juicy, and as we can store more information with files, I think this is something we should have. Don't you agree? Great for leaves, Evie. I agree. For painting leaves, yeah, absolutely. Very, very cool. Good for, yeah, or cloud. How can we use Google? I'm sorry, I missed that comment. Google says it's called a cauldron of bats if you have a group of them. I wonder if that's true. Wow, that's pretty cool if it is. All right. Evie's asking about the reference layer. Phil, ask me more specifically about that. I can answer the question about where the layer goes. You should have the reference layer should always be the topmost layer so that the color you're filling will appear underneath it and you can still see your line art. I hope that clears that up. And it works for vector brushes and for pixel brushes as well. All right, so back to basics. So let's go back to our group here where we have our bats, okay? Another thing with selections is that you don't have to just use basic lasso tool with a sort of curvilinear line like this, okay? What I love about Fresco's lasso tool is that we've combined the polygonal lasso tool and the freehand lasso tool from Photoshop into one single tool, which means what I can do, go ahead and merge these guys together, is I can do this. Instead of having to be forced to complete my selection like this, I can draw a selection, pause for a moment, okay, take a sip of coffee, whatever, and then resume drawing, okay, and come back to close it. The other thing I can do is this. I can use the polygonal lasso tool or polygonal lasso tool like this. I can tap for straight edges, but I can also draw for curvilinear, so I can combine these anytime I want. And that's a really powerful thing, all right? Because what it means is I can do this. Tap, 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 okay? And then draw, 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 tap, tap. See what I mean? So I can make a nice selection of a bat and then fill it with color. Let's make that a vector bat. And there he is. Okay. Now, look at this wing. This wing is a lot bigger than the wing to the left. But because we have the power of transformation and selections combined with one another, what I can do is select just this wing, okay? And now I can transform it. So we'll just do this. Shorten that up. Get that feeling right. Say done. And now everything is just fine. So don't forget, you can select parts of your illustration. and you can transform those. And of course, you can use the distort and the perspective and all the other transformations within that selection as well. So really, you have no excuse not to draw things perfectly. I'm sorry, not to put pressure on you, but that's what that means, because if you draw something wonky or weird, you can always select part of it and transform it and make it look right. Pretty great. So there's our little vector bat right there, made by drawing a selection and then filling it with color. All right, now we've looked at the lasso tool, but we have not done this. Long tap on your selection tools, and now look, you have options. Okay, we're going to skip over the magic wand for now because we're going to get to that one a little later. Let's look at paint selection. This is one that is very underutilized, but I think it's pretty awesome. If I want to select this little bat here in the center of my canvas at the moment, okay, watch this. I am painting with my Apple Pencil here to create a selection. So I'm painting a very specific shape. See this? Just paint, 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 like that. Paint, paint, paint. Very cool. So you can paint selections as well, right? And then we can take this and we can, whoops, wrong layer. Whoop, whoop. Come back here. And we gotta paint our selection there. There we go. And transform it. I can move it around and rotate it again and do whatever I need to do. Okay? So that's another little handy thing. Another thing, and this is just one of those little customizable things that everybody has a different preference, okay? I like the dancing ants or marching ants or whatever you want to call this selection mode where you see these little dotted lines that are sort of marching around the shape that you've drawn. Some people don't. Some people prefer this. If I tap on more down here where we have all our selection options, you have marching ants, but you also have selection overlay. Tap on that, and this is the result. So basically it isolates your selection and everything else in the document becomes these diagonal lines that are slowly moving across. So it just depends on what you like. This is a personal preference thing. I like the marching ants. For me, it's just really easy to see. So see you later, Bliss. Thanks for joining us. Paint selection is your favorite. Oh, cool. Cody uses paint selection. Everybody, if Cody does, then you all have to use it too. Okay. Ah, you never knew you could do that, Heba. Glad you're learning some stuff here. Very cool. You want to use the reference layer to create a pattern. Change colors for same illustration but different places on the page. Evie, that's no problem. Quickly, I'll show you what I mean. Make a new layer. So if your pattern, whoops, hang on a minute. Let's reset that and go back to our recent brushes and we'll use our Belgian comics. So if your pattern, all right, is something like this. Forgive me, this is not going to be the most exciting pattern in the world. All right, so there's our little pattern, okay? Now, you decide that you want to do variations of this with different colors, correct? All you have to do is make this your reference layer, like this, set as reference, okay? Now the layer underneath it, or create a layer underneath it, you do what we did before. Grab your paint bucket tool, go ahead and fill the colors. Tap to fill, make sure the color margin is what you want right here, right? And then we grab another color. All right, and there's one option, okay? Now look, that's living on its own layer. See, there are the colors, they're all on their own layer. Just create another layer, okay, above that. And now do some different colors. Because the reference layer is still the reference layer. It's not gonna change. All right, it's always gonna be the reference layer. Nothing there has changed. Now there's your other option. Make sense? All right, so there's our line art is still there, doing its own thing. And we have one color option here and one color option here, okay? Using the same reference layer inking. There you go. I hope that was helpful. And I hope that's what you meant. Alrighty. Moving on to some other selection tools, okay? Let's go back to our bats over here. We have as well the rectangle, so of course that's a rectangular selection, or a rectangular marquee as it's called in Photoshop. Now with the rectangular marquee, and this is the same for the ellipse, which I'll show you in a minute, you are able to use the touch modifier again. All right, think of it like the shift key in Photoshop where you're going to do something precise. All right, so watch this. If I want to make a perfect square, hold it down, and there you go. Now it's constraining those proportions to make it square. The height and the width will be the same. And now there's your square selection. Remember that you're always in an additive mode with all these selection tools, lasso tool, etc. So if I draw anywhere else on the screen, it's automatically going to be just adding to that selection. This can be a fun way to draw, to create shapes, okay? Now, you don't always want to do that, but we made it very easy, very fast for you to do it, to make a cutout in your selection, or to work with removing selections. Just hold down the touch modifier. Sorry, no. Here we go. This little guy. Here's your options right here in the bottom left. I just talked about the touch modifier. This bottom left one here allows you to remove from your selection. See that? Applies to anything. If I go back to the lasso tool, see down here, still in that mode. So I can cut out this area, cut out that area. So now we're working subtractively, and then deselect. And of course, like I just mentioned, you have the ellipse as well. So we can make a selection like this, or we can hold down the touch modifier and make a perfect circle like that. All right, now let's say I make this selection, and this is, I'm just going to get a bit more specific here. I'll use the lasso tool. All right. Now, maybe I'm doing some piece of art where, for whatever reason, this very specific selection is something I have to use repeatedly, okay, for a couple of layers or for something else. So I make my selection, and I move things around, and I say done, and then maybe I deselect and I do a bit of painting or something, and things change. Then I get to a point where I'm at a different layer, but I need to make exactly the same selection as before. Check this out. If I go now to my selection tools, load last selection, it's the last option right here. See that? It'll recall the most recent selection that you used. Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so that covers everything with selections except for Magic Wand, which we'll look at in just a moment. But for now, I also want to show you something completely different when it comes to transformations, okay? And so for that, we have this little guy, okay? Now, let's go ahead and let's hide this layer for a moment, and let's look at this. This is the original painting, okay? This is the original painting. Now, I want you to look at this again. Well, how did I do that? This is Liquify. This is such a powerful transformation tool. And the way it works is, again, open your Move and Transform right here. Now look at the bottom. We've already covered Skew, Distort, and Perspective, but here's Liquify. Liquify opens up a whole bunch of other options for you. There are seven different Liquify options, plus the ability to reconstruct your image, okay? Pardon me. 7, did I say 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think, yeah, 7, 6 Liquify modes and 1 where you can reconstruct. And reconstruction is like a really cool way to undo through painting. All right, but let's take a look at these. They're very easy to understand. Warp is basically you're pushing stuff around on the screen with your brush, okay, like that. And so with warp, for example, that's how I was able to take this forehead and just change the shape of this character's little head, like that. Boom. All right, now, making the eye bigger, I use bloat. Okay, you can change the size of your brush, so to speak, right here. You can use a very large brush if you want for something like this. And I just tap and hold for a moment right over the eye, and look at that. It just makes it bigger. right? There's very, very little, if any, pixelation that happens when you use Liquify in moderation, of course, which is one of the really cool things about it. But then you have others, of course. Pucker is going to do the opposite. So if I tap and hold again, it's going to make it a little smaller. You have things like twirl. Twirl will do some weird stuff. If I take twirl and hold it over here, for example, it twirls what's there, okay? Obviously, you can make the brush much larger. Look at that, 8,000. You can go huge with these effects, okay? And do some wild and wacky things. And then you have push left. I never use this one, but it exists. And what it is whichever direction you push, okay? So if I move from top to bottom, things are going to move to the right. Undo a few times. If I move from bottom to top, things are going to move to the left. And if I move from left to right, things are going to move up. And if I move from right to left, things are going to move down. It's just a really interesting way to distort, and if you have really specific ways to use that, let me know in the chat. I haven't used it before, but I wanted to explain how it works, okay? Other things, Liquify has saved you many times, says Peter. Yeah, Liquify is pretty great. Pretty great. And for each of these, by the way, oh, I forgot to here, let's reconstruct. So first, let me just make that eye a little bigger again. Make the eye bigger. All right, and we'll also, we'll take the horn here and change its shape like this. Okay, now, reconstruct is really cool. Reconstruct allows you to paint back different parts of the image. So you're undoing, but only wherever you paint. That's really cool. So let's say, I like everything I've done, but I want the head to go back to where it was. I just paint over here, where I made changes to the head, and eventually it'll reconstruct it back to what it was. But look, the horn and the eye are still the same. So that's a really cool thing. I can paint over the eye a little bit, make it a little smaller, but only in a specific area, change the shape of the eye like this. Go back for a moment, whoops. Redo, 3-finger tap, undo. If I make my reconstruction brush big enough to cover the eye, I can tap and hold just a bit, see that, and make the eye just a little smaller. Everything can be undone in a very specific way. This is pretty cool. You can laser target areas of your painting and mess around with them, okay? So there you go. Smoothing will just take any transformation that you've done, and it'll kind of round it back out. And that's it. So there's your Liquify tools. These are so powerful. They're included in your options to transform things, and I love them, okay? So done. There, now we have a variation of our little guy there. There's the original right here. Make sure I can show that. There we go. From this to that. Pretty fun. All right. So the only thing remaining to talk about is masks and clipping masks, okay? But if you have any questions about anything, please let me know in the chat. Great for retouching. Yes, it's good for retouching for sure. Sean has a question. Does it have pin edges? No. I assume you mean pin the edges of the document so that you don't liquify and then actually pull the edges of the image inside of the document. That's a good request, and I think we should have that, so definitely one worth talking about. Yep. Are the Liquify tools on mobile, Heba asks. You mean on phone? I don't know. Sorry, but I don't know the answer to that. Good question. I don't know. All right, so let's go back now to our bats. Okay, masking in Fresco is pretty similar to how it works in Photoshop, very straightforward. So let me just use our bats again for this. I'll come back to our little bat guys, and we'll erase these orange bits that we don't need here. Come down here and look, erase. I just tap on erase and you're gone. All right, now masking. Let's say I don't want to get rid of this bat right here, this little bat. I don't want to get rid of him, but I also don't want him to be visible right now in my document. So what do? Well, I can create a mask like this, just tap. And I have two options. I can either show what I've selected. So on this layer, okay, I'm going to be hiding everything else and showing what I've selected, or I can hide what I've selected, which is down here at the bottom. Just tap on hide. Okay. And when I come back now, whoops, it didn't hide it. What did I do? Reveal. Oh, it's because now I'm in a mode where I'm masking. I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry. Hang on a second. I'm going to step back for a moment, and I'm going to get rid of this mask. There we go. All right, so I want to keep this right here. Use my selection tool, keep it, bloop, and then mask it. There we go. All right, so when you select, yes, you're going to be selecting the thing you want to be visible. And the moment you do that, look over here at my layer, and you're going to see this red area here. It's showing me the area that's hidden. White always shows you what's visible. But I can take my stylus or my finger and I can swipe to the right. And now it shows me what that looks like in my document. Now you and I both know that the bats are still there. In fact, if you look at the image preview right here, see that? There's the little layer thumbnail. I can see my other little bat is there, but he's just not visible in the document anymore. I have masked him out of the image. Now if we go back to our mask right here, now this reveal and hide stuff will make sense to you. What I'm going to do is, if I want to reveal part of the bat, okay, what I can do is I can paint or select, doesn't matter how I do it, but I'll just go ahead and start painting. See that? And what I'm doing is I'm revealing part of what's on that layer. Okay? Now if I just want his head showing, I can go to hide, down here, hide, and then I can paint away everything except the head of the bat. The bat's still there. I haven't erased anything, so to speak, right? Look, now, there you go. This is what I see now, okay, with this image. You'll notice that the mask is automatically tied to the image so that when I move the image, the mask itself moves with it, okay? Done. Now, again, I can look at this layer here, swipe it to the right, like that, and then see my mask. And now if I tap on the layer, you're going to see that I have some layer mask actions. I can delete it, select multiple, let's select multiple layers. I can copy that mask because there are times when you're going to want to be able to use a mask more than once. Let's say you have a very specific shape that you've masked out and you want that to be applied to different layers, but you want to work non-destructively and not get rid of the actual pixel data that's on those layers. So you want to preserve them, you use masks, okay? I can invert the mask. What that means is I can, instead of showing what's there that's in the mask, hide whatever has been masked. All right, so if you go back to what I did earlier, where I made a selection, let's go back to where there's no mask at all. So I said to myself, well, I want to hide this little guy. And then I said, make a mask down here, right? But that was the opposite of what I wanted. So what I can do is tap on the mask and invert it. And now you'll see that I'm revealing, okay, the other bat and hiding the bat that I selected. So you can go about it that way if you want as well. Let's go back to our options. You can flatten the mask. That means basically you're going to, this is a destructive action. I've erased the other bat. Okay, so that's the only time you ever want to flatten a mask is if you actually intend to get rid of whatever you've masked out. And then you have this red overlay, which is what we're used to looking at, but you also have this option to show on layers, which gives you a black mask, which is what everybody's familiar with from Photoshop, the black and white. Black means hide, white means show, so then you know what that looks like, okay? Go back, tap on that, and go back to red overlay. And that's the basics of masking in Fresco. So very similar to Photoshop. A couple of things that are noteworthy here is that you remember in Photoshop, you have the option to lock a mask to the layer content so that, as I did before, I moved things around, right? And the mask followed with me. Now, you don't always want to do that. So here, look on the right, and you'll see that we have this little guy. It's got a little link right there. So if I tap on that, okay, the layer mask is now unlinked. So now if I take my, let's go back to the layer itself. Here we go. And now if I move those contents, see that? That starts to peek out there from the area that I've selected. You can see what's happening as things move in and out of the mask. So you do have that flexibility there, and that's important for a lot of people to be able to do that. Sometimes they want to link, sometimes they want to unlink that mask. So now you can see that that is possible, and all you have to do is use your options right here. When I'm in mask mode, I can see that link. I can tap that back on, and now things are where they need to be. Okay? Now, let's look at clipping masks. Last but certainly not least, and one of my favorite things to do is use clipping masks. So for this, we'll hide this layer here. We'll hide this layer, make a new layer. Okay. And what I'm going to do is draw a little Frankenstein monster here. And there he is. Okay, and we'll go ahead and we'll fill a little color there. Whoops. Oh, I forgot. I was trying to figure out what happened. I forgot that I had a reference layer here, which I gotta release. Bye-bye. There we go. That's what's happening. All right, back to fill. Get that up there. Excelente. Okay, so here's my Frankenstein. I'll set him as a reference layer and create some color behind him there. Clunk. That looks good. All right, now I've got this Frankenstein, and what I want to do is I want to paint something on top of the Frankenstein, but I want it to stay inside the boundaries of what I've already painted. Okay, so on the color layer here, okay, I'm going to create a clipping layer. First, I'm going to make a new layer here, and then I want you to look right here. See this little square with an arrow? I'm just going to tap on that. This tells me I'm clipping to just the layer underneath. Okay, so watch this. If I take my brush now, I'll grab a different color, and I paint over here, nothing happens. But as I travel this way, oh, see that? Every time it touches pixels that exist on the layer underneath it, okay, then I'm able to make modifications. So now what I can do, and this is great for coloring and for doing all kinds of stuff, is I can add some shadows. And I make this a bit more purple, like this. And I start to do this. I'm going to make a shadow here, make a shadow here, make a shadow here. All right. And we're going to do sort of a top left kind of a lighting thing here. I don't have to be super specific on this side. Look, I can just do this. Isn't that nice? There. So I do my little shadows there, okay? and everything gets locked. And then I can take this layer and I can make an adjustment by by making it a multiply layer and then reducing its opacity like this. And now I've got my shadow. Super cool. So clipping means you're basically, it's like using layer transparency, locking layer transparency, but in a way where you can paint over stuff using clipping masks. And this is really powerful. If you don't use these in Photoshop, use them. If you don't use them in Fresco, use them. You're working in a non-destructive way. You're keeping things separated nicely. It's just tremendous. So that's one of the ways I love to use clipping masks, but there are other ways to do it, of course, as well. But that's the basic idea. I can continue painting now. I've got that layer mode in there. I can get all refined and get exactly what I want. Okay? Isn't that fun? All right, well, so there you go. Thanks everybody for tuning in for another Let's Go Fresco. There'll be another one after Adobe Max. If you haven't registered, go ahead at least and watch it online if you're not going in person. Okay, tons and tons of content there. And this has been Let's Go Fresco. I'm Kyle Webster. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Remember to be kind. And I'll say ciao for now.